welcome back to Masters of the Universe Classics Director's Commentary. And this episode is a tribute to Trafe. And by that, I mean all of the great lobster action figures that have existed over the years. What, you didn't think there were a lot of lobster action figures over the years? I mean, come on, it's a very popular form for toys to take. People like to dress up as lobsters and eat lobsters and yeah, okay, there haven't been that many lobster action figures. In fact, I'm stretching the limit as is. Probably don't even know what this one is, even though it is a licensed lobster character. Hands up, who knows who this is? Anyone? Anyone? All right. 5 lobster points for those who recognize that it's Pinchy the lobster. Yeah, they made a stuffed animal out of Pinchy. All right, so why am I showing you all these images of awesome lobster action figures? Well, that's because today we're talking about the greatest lobster action figure of them all. Actually, is he a lobster or a crab? Is he even like a crustacean? Maybe he's just like an alien from the planet Eternia, which is what I think he's supposed to be. Either way, we're obviously talking about the Masters of the Universe villain, Clawful. The giant red clawed villain, ally of Skeletor, big green club thingy, shell armor, the whole 9 yards. This was an awesome figure. He was a definite favorite of mine, and he was a big favorite of Eric from the Four Horsemen. In fact, he personally asked us to move Clawful up in the development schedule because he wanted Clawful. He wanted to get him sooner than later, and I was more than happy to oblige. I think originally he was in 2013, and I swapped him with Spikor. So you got Clawful earlier because Eric loved Clawful. When Clawful was in the animation, he definitely changed a lot every single time, no matter what the animation was, from the way he was represented as a toy. When he was in the Filmation series, he kind of looked a little bit more like a dragon, maybe you could say, and both of his claws were the same size, which pretty much depletes the entire point of having one giant claw. And when he was in the 2000X series, the Mike Young production, he was kind of recast as, well, shall we say, not the brightest of Skeletor's thugs. There always tends to be one thug in every villain group that has to be the token dunce of the group. And unfortunately, they made that Clawful. I always thought Clawful was like the muscle of the group. You know, he was the guy who brought the claw. And imagine how cool he would probably have looked in live action if they'd gotten to him. I mean, he would have been a warrior to contend with, right? Rising out of the ocean, grabbing you with his claw and cracking you open to feast on your innards with butter sauce. And boy, now I want some lobster. Anyway, the other reason that he got changed in the 2000X series is his size. In 2000X, not only was he kind of the dunce of the group, but he was also one of the physically bigger characters. They did that with a lot of characters in 2000X, making them physically taller, physically broader. Beastman was like this as well. Whiplash, another example. And because the 2000X series had come out, or rather had been canceled very not long before Classics came out, it left a very long shadow. And there were fans of the 2000X series that were still very rabid fans when Classics came out, myself included. And a lot of them, I think, were disappointed that Classics didn't skew more towards 2000X. It became its own thing. So not getting a large Clawful action figure was really, I don't want to say hurtful, but I guess it was a disappointment. A lot of fans really wanted that. But in Classics, the goal was always to copy the vintage line. It was a different translation of the vintage line where it was a 1-to-1, as opposed to 2000X took more liberties and did different visual interpretations of the characters. So because everyone was meant to be in the same scale when we got to Clawful, we were going to base Clawful off of the vintage figure, not off of his appearance from 2000X. Even though, you know, the armor didn't change that much, he did get the extra height and the extra, you know, broad shoulders, you know, yada yada, being a really beefy guy. So while there was, I think, some initial disappointment, I think in time people came to realize that that's what Classics was all about, was taking the vintage figures and literally translating them to just give them more articulation, more deco, more detail, not to reinterpret them the way the 2000X series did, giving them different armor, more spikes, more what I call the hyper anime detail, or in Clawful's case, giving him extra height. So you got him in the same height as everyone else, and I think that was the whole point. We were doing that on purpose. We were not trying to create larger characters, of course, except in the case of things like Geiger or Titus, but that's an entirely different video altogether. But we got to Clawful, and we got to him earlier. A big thanks again to Eric, because he was like, I want Clawful, he was my favorite. And I was like, yes, we are totally going to honor that request, because you are an awesome sculptor, and I want to do that. And if you like the version of him from the Filmation series, what was nice is the Club Filmation series, or Club Grayskull, is that what they called it? I only sort of laid the plans for it. It was carried out by the new team. So they did do that. All right, the next thing we need to talk about Clawful is probably a little bit about how he was made. He had an interesting use of parts. Oh, wait, by the way, before I get to that, going back to his bio, which flashed by on the back, you'll notice his real name is said as pronounced through a series of claw clicks. This was actually from the 2000X show. I thought that was really cool that they speak in claw clicks, and so that's what his name would be in. All right. Anyway, back to his construction. Buzz-Off. Buzz-Off provided a lot of the pieces we needed for Clawful, as well as for Whiplash. And it was actually why Buzz-Off was scheduled early on, was so that we could get those pieces. So you'll see here the shoulder detail without the armor. He has the same body as Buzz-Off, the same upper arms, and the same legs as well, even though you can't see the legs in this piece. Now, interesting quick side note, you'll see that he was painted under his armor red, versus the vintage figure didn't get any paint under the armor. He just had, I guess you could say, Caucasian human skin, if you will. And this was actually a big part of my play pattern when I was a kid for some reason. I was really fascinated with what he looked like under his armor, because he had a red head, he had red arms, but he basically looked like He-Man underneath. So for some reason, I used to always play kind of a MOTU game, I guess you could say, hide the shell, which meant that He-Man and his warriors were always stealing Clawful's armor, and Clawful had to find it and get it back. Just because I love playing with Clawful without his armor. So when we got to the Classics figure, who had a painted torso underneath, it kind of like, it took me a minute to be like, wait, there's something wrong with this. I can't place my finger on it. And then, of course, I was like, oh, yeah, that's right. The vintage figure had no paint on his torso, but we're painting his torso this time, which honestly I think makes sense. I think he just didn't get a painted torso to save on deco costs back in the day, because, what was the point? How many people were really going to play with him without his armor like I did? But if you did play without his armor in the Classics figure, you got a really cool back and front piece that snapped closed, and again, his torso was painted red, and he had all of those rivets. He didn't just have the human chest that the vintage figure had. So one key difference between Classics and vintage. So I guess, it wasn't a straight translation. All right, we couldn't do a video about Clawful without talking about his overabundance of hair. And obviously I'm not talking about a beard, I'm talking about his eyebrows. Fans had, I don't want to call it an issue again, but they really brought up his eyebrows and how big and fluffy they were. But again, the thing is, the vintage figure in the line had really big eyebrows. And when we were doing the Classics figure, the whole idea, minus the fact that he now had a painted torso and not the He-Man torso, but as far as a face is concerned, the eyebrows there on the Classic figure were taken directly from the vintage figure. I mean, if you look at them side by side, it's a pretty darn good update, if you will. I mean, the Horsemen just did a direct translation, not an adaptation. They didn't add or subtract or take it in a different direction, again, like 2000X did. That was an adaptation. Classics was a translation. So they did a great job of taking all the features from the vintage figure. I mean, even other versions of Clawful put out by other companies do the really heavy eyebrows. And fans just, the feedback was it made him look goofy. I guess maybe made as a fully articulated figure, the goofiness stood out more, I guess. I don't know. We got a lot of gruff about that. But, of course, we always try to solve things, and one way we did do that was the Heads of Eternia pack, which came out at the tail end of the line, or at least the tail end of my time on the line, and we were able to include a 2000X inspired Clawful head. This head was not sculpted at the time of Clawful, unlike Buzz-Off and Grizzlor, who did have their heads sculpted at the time of their original figure. The other ones, like Snoutspout and Roboto and Cyclone and Clawful, those heads were newly sculpted for this pack. They weren't sitting around for years the way Buzz-Off's head was. And there you can see kind of a side-by-side comparison. And really, it's just losing the eyebrows and getting a few more, ridges and crests to his, lobstery claw details of skin. Do lobsters have skin? I don't know. I don't even know what you would call it. But actually, this is one of my preferred heads. Of the figures, I actually do enjoy the 2000X head more. We weren't able to make him bigger, obviously, and have him tower over the heroes like he did in the version from 2000X where he was, reinterpreted. But at least we could give you that head. So either A, he had a meaner head, B, if you hated those eyebrows with a passion, and there were clearly a lot of fans that hated those eyebrows with a passion, because boy, did we get a lot of comments online about those eyebrows. So there you go. There he is without eyebrows in his 2000X look. And as I mentioned earlier, if you prefer his Filmation look, that was handled as well as a completely different figure altogether when the Club Grayskull line came out. So, in the end, Clawful made it. He translated really well. He was one of those vintage figures that was more or less pretty basic. His action feature was amazing. The whole, clicky claw thing. I think it was one of the original fidget toys, if you will. We didn't even realize it, but his action feature actually pretty much was a fidget toy. I used to love clicky-clacking that. And in the end, I think we brought humans and lobsters closer together with this figure. And we were that much closer to world peace, or at least Eternia peace. So, next time you see a lobster, give it a hug before you eat it.